When an alien nurse meets a human soldier clinging to life, everything she thought she knew about medicine, strength, and survival is shattered. He wasn't supposed to survive. He definitely wasn't supposed to stand. But what happened next? Rewrote the limits of biology and touched something deeper than science ever could. If you're new here, please subscribe to the channel and show some love with a thumbs up by liking the video. Now, let's jump into the story. The medibay on Astralis 9 was quiet, the kind of calm that only came during routine hours. The air inside shimmered slightly with sterilized moisture, and the soft pulse of monitoring equipment made a gentle rhythm, almost like a heartbeat for the station itself. Nurse Silri walked gracefully through the corridor, her translucent skin catching the blue glow of the overhead lights. Her people, the Lorvians, were known for their peaceful nature and gentle precision. Silri, like most of her kind, trusted science, structure, and logic. She had treated hundreds of injuries across dozens of species, and nothing ever surprised her anymore. At least, that's what she believed. Then the alarm sounded. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp, an emergency signal. Moments later, the outer bay doors hissed open, and two medics burst in, pushing a hover gurney. Their expressions were tense, which was rare for Lorvians. Silri met them halfway, her long fingers already hovering over her diagnostic tablet. "What's the injury?" she asked quickly. One of the medics answered without slowing. "Human male. Commander Riven Hall. Training accident. Sector 9. Silri's eyes flicked down to the gurney. The figure was barely recognizable beneath the bandages and dried blood. His face was bruised and pale, one eye swollen shut. A jagged tear cut across his abdomen, and his left arm looked mangled beyond use. She had seen bad injuries before, but this looked like a lost cause. Stabilize vitals. "Isolate room 5, Silri instructed firmly, already moving beside the gurney. "He's going to crash if we don't begin treatment now." The medics obeyed instantly. Within moments, the human was transferred into a sterile isolation unit. The diagnostic scanner buzzed to life and projected a full holographic image of the damage hovering above the bed. Silri examined it and frowned. Crushed ribs, collapsed lung, ruptured spleen, internal bleeding, a fractured spine, and severe muscular tears. Any one of these injuries could have been fatal. All of them together? Unthinkable. What was he doing in Sector 9? Silri murmured aloud, not expecting an answer. The medics had already retreated. Sector 9 was infamous for being a rugged training ground designed for the Lorvians' unique ability to glide and recover quickly. Humans weren't built for that kind of stress. Not yet. Not without support. She turned to the array of medical tools and selected a small injector. It hissed softly as she filled it with a stabilizer compound mixed with low-level regenerative nanites. Without hesitation, she pressed the device against Riven's neck and activated it. The tiny machines dispersed instantly into his bloodstream, beginning their slow work. Still, she didn't hold out much hope. "I don't think you're going to make it," she said under her breath, but something in his vitals caught her eye. His heart rate, though weak, was steadying. His oxygen levels climbed slowly, like a struggling swimmer refusing to sink. She leaned in closer, watching the patterns. Humans were strange, she thought. Their biology was chaotic. There was no smooth balance like the Lorvians. Everything in them was built for fight or flight, raw, messy, unpredictable. And yet, effective. She sat beside the pod, watching the monitor tick second by second. Hours passed, and the medibay faded into quiet again. Only the soft hum of machines surrounded her. And still, the human fought. He shouldn't have been conscious, not with those injuries, but his fingers twitched every now and then. His eyelids fluttered. Silri furrowed her brow. "Impossible," she whispered. She tapped into the central database, pulling up human biology references. The entries were incomplete. Most of what was known came from exchange programs and joint missions. Humans were known to be emotional, impulsive, even reckless, but also incredibly adaptive. Their immune systems were powerful, often overcompensating. Their willpower, she had read, could sometimes override their pain responses. Siluri had dismissed that as anecdotal nonsense before. Now, watching this broken body slowly knit itself back together, she wasn't so sure. Suddenly, Riven groaned. His body jerked slightly. Siluri rose from her seat, startled. His lips moved, barely forming words. She leaned closer. "Commander." "Halle, can you hear me?" she asked. There was a pause, then the faintest nod. He was awake. "You shouldn't be," she said, almost accusingly. "Your body isn't ready." Riven's eyes opened, just barely. They were glassy, unfocused, but aware. "Feels like I got run over by a planet," he mumbled, then coughed painfully. Siluri blinked. "Was that humor?" "You're in Metabay." "On Astralis 9, she said calmly. "Don't try to move. The machines are keeping you alive." Riven closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. "I've had worse," he muttered. Siluri tilted her head. "That is extremely unlikely." He actually smiled. "You'd be surprised." And for the first time in her long career, Siluri didn't know what to say. This creature, this human, was nothing like what she expected. Broken, bleeding, and still joking. Still alive. Somehow. She glanced at the data monitor again. His vitals were improving, slowly but surely. Maybe he really would survive. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something she had never witnessed before. Not just a recovery, but something more. Something that would change the way she looked at his kind forever. The Metabay settled into its usual quiet, but Siluri felt anything but calm. She had spent countless hours in that room, listening to the soft hum of scanners and the gentle whir of hovering med drones. But this time was different. There was something about the human lying in the isolation unit that made the silence feel heavier, almost like it was waiting to break open. Riven Hall, a name she barely knew before, had become the center of her attention. He shouldn't have survived the first night, not with those wounds. And yet, there he was, breathing steadily, bruised but unshaken. Siluri found herself checking his vitals more often than needed, her fingers lingering on the monitors just a little longer than protocol required. He was asleep now, his face relaxed, no longer twisted in pain. She watched his chest rise and fall. It was a small movement, but one that defied everything she had expected. Human physiology was unpredictable, noisy, unstable, constantly adapting. The Lorvian body was built for balance and quiet strength, but humans burned through their healing like they were racing something unseen. Siluri couldn't explain it. Every scan suggested he should still be unconscious, but Riven kept doing things that went against the numbers. He shifted in his sleep. He muttered things, names, places, moments. He dreamed loudly, unlike her own kind, who dreamed in silence. She began documenting more than just the medical updates. She took notes on his expressions, his micro-reactions, his whispers. There was a story unfolding beneath his recovery. A story she didn't understand yet, but one she couldn't stop thinking about. In one moment of semi-consciousness, Riven had opened his eyes and simply asked, "Did the others make it?" That was his first concern, not himself, not the pain, but the people he'd been training with. Siluri had paused, unsure how to respond. She told him they were safe. It wasn't entirely confirmed yet, but she wanted to ease his mind. The way his body relaxed after, that made her feel like she'd done something right. Even if it went beyond her medical training. Later that day, she returned to his room to find him wide awake, propped up slightly with the help of a gravity-adjusted frame. He looked exhausted but alert. His eyes, a rich brown with tiny flecks of gold, tracked her carefully as she entered. "Back again?" he said, voice dry but steady. Silri nodded, her expression neutral, though she felt oddly relieved to hear his voice again. "You should be resting," she replied, checking the monitor beside his bed. "I do when you're not here," he said with a crooked grin. Silri blinked. Was that supposed to be charming? She wasn't sure how to process it, but it stirred something, an unexpected flicker of emotion she couldn't define. "You heal fast," she said instead, changing the subject. "Faster than most species I've treated." Riven's smile faded a little. "We don't get a lot of second chances where I come from," he replied. "We get hurt, we push through. That's how we survive." Silri nodded slowly. "Your systems are chaotic, but efficient. Almost like they refuse to give up." He chuckled. "Sounds about right." Their conversations became more frequent. Short exchanges at first, observations, questions, jokes. Silri found herself staying past her scheduled hours, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Something about Riven pulled her in. He didn't talk like the other patients. He didn't complain. He didn't panic. Even when the pain returned, he gritted his teeth and made jokes. One evening, she walked in to find him humming softly, tapping his fingers against the side of the bed in rhythm. "Music?" she asked. "Old song," he said. "My sister used to play it on the piano. I can't remember the words, but the tune stuck." Silri tilted her head. "We don't have music the way you do," she said. "We have tones for balance and sleep rhythms, but nothing with emotion." Riven looked at her. "Then you're missing something big." She didn't reply, but the words stayed with her. That night, she played the tones stored in the Metabay database. They were calming, yes, but cold. They had no color, no rise, no fall. She tried humming like he did. It felt strange. Yet somehow, she wanted to try again. The next time she visited him, she told him about it. Riven laughed, a deep, full sound. "Don't worry," he said. "It's not about getting it right. It's about feeling it." That word, again, feeling. Lorvians weren't trained for that. They were trained for control, reason, logic. But with Riven, logic kept bending. Days passed. His wounds healed at an unbelievable rate. Soon he could sit up on his own. Then he started walking, supported at first, then without help. Silri walked beside him through the Metabay corridor, ready to catch him if he stumbled. He never did. She asked why he pushed himself so hard. "Because I promised my team I'd lead them," he said. "And I'm not breaking that promise." Silri watched him closely. Every step he took seemed powered by something invisible. Something stronger than medicine. Maybe it was loyalty. Maybe it was stubbornness. Or maybe it was the spark she'd heard about in old stories. The fire humans carried in their chest. The one that never dimmed, no matter the pain. That night, she sat alone in the Metabay, watching his medical data scroll across the screen. All signs were good. All systems stable. But her thoughts weren't on the numbers anymore. They were on the person behind them, the injured outsider who had defied every expectation. And for the first time in a long while, Silri felt something stir in her chest. Something new, something warm, something like a spark in the silence. Riven stood at the far end of the recovery chamber, leaning against a curved support beam as he adjusted to the artificial gravity. His movements were slow, deliberate, but no longer shaky. The wounds that had nearly killed him were healing with a speed that still baffled everyone, especially Silri. She watched him from the control station, her pale fingers hovering just above the data screen. His vitals were improving rapidly, and yet her concern hadn't eased. It wasn't just the physical damage that worried her. It was the sheer force of his will. He didn't stop. He didn't pause. Every moment of rest seemed like a delay he refused to accept. He had been moved from isolation to the general recovery area only a few days ago, but already he had begun his own routine stretching, walking, breathing exercises, and even attempting to climb the low therapy rails lining the walls. Silri had never seen anything like it. Most patients clung to comfort after trauma. They leaned on support and followed orders with quiet obedience. But Riven Hale he treated every new hour like a battlefield. She had asked him once, in a rare moment of calm, "Why do you keep pushing when you've already done more than anyone expected?" He had given her a tired smile and replied, "Because I'm not done proving I belong here." The words stuck with her. The Medibay had seen visitors from dozens of planets, but humans were still rare. They were unpredictable, emotional, strange. But Riven had shifted her view. He wasn't just recovering. He was leading by example. Other patients in the ward began to notice. A Theran soldier with fractured limbs, once reluctant to move, started following Riven's stretches. A young Zori who cried every day since surgery had begun to smile after seeing him nod encouragement. Silri didn't say anything about it, but inside, she marveled at the ripple he caused. One afternoon, Riven attempted the incline ramp that was usually reserved for those in later stages of recovery. Silri noticed from across the hall and immediately approached. "That's not advised," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "Your joints are still under strain." Riven wiped sweat from his brow and glanced over his shoulder. "Then I guess it's time they learned to hold together." She almost laughed, but instead stepped beside him, watching closely. Each step was an effort. His breathing grew heavier, and once he nearly stumbled. Silri moved to catch him, but he straightened himself, jaw clenched. He kept going, step after step, until he reached the top. When he turned around and saw her still standing there, he simply said, "Told you." That night, as the simulated dusk dimmed the Medibay's lights, Silri sat beside his bed during his evening monitoring. His body bore signs of progress, tissue regeneration nearly complete, bone density improving, blood chemistry stable. But it was his eyes she kept returning to. They burned with a kind of fierce light, not fever, not adrenaline, purpose. She asked quietly, "What drives you really?" Riven took a deep breath before answering. "I've made promises. Back home, promises matter. I told my brother I'd come back with stories. I told my crew I'd lead them through training. And I told myself that if I ever got the chance to be out here, really out here, I wouldn't waste a second of it." Silri didn't respond right away. Her world was one of procedure, of schedules and regulations. Her people didn't make promises, they made plans. Riven's determination didn't fit neatly into her understanding of recovery. But maybe that was the point. Maybe healing wasn't just about mending tissue. Maybe it was also about remembering who you were and refusing to let go of it, even when everything around you tried to pull it away. The next day brought an unexpected challenge. A systems glitch sent a brief energy surge through the Medibay, scrambling some of the environmental controls. Power flickered, and a few of the med units malfunctioned, causing confusion and minor injuries. Silri was trying to restore calibration when she heard a raised voice across the hall. It was Riven. He was calming another patient, a frail Jetheri, who had panicked when her oxygen stabilizer flickered. Silri watched as Riven sat beside the frightened girl, placed a steady hand on her shoulder, and spoke in a calm, grounded tone. He stayed with her until the system stabilized. It wasn't his job, but he did it anyway. After the incident, Silri ran a full scan on Riven. She expected fatigue, perhaps signs of relapse. Instead, his readings were stronger than ever. His heart was steady, his reflexes sharper, even his. Neural scans showed heightened activity. She looked at him, half amazed and half confused. "You shouldn't be recovering this fast," she said. Riven gave her a crooked grin. "Guess no one told my body that." Silri didn't laugh. Instead, she looked down at the chart, then back up at him. "You're changing more than just your own file, you know. Other patients, they see you and want to do more. They're not just healing. They're following you." Riven's smile faded into something quieter, more thoughtful. "I don't want to be a symbol," he said. "I just want to show them what we're capable of." That night, Silri sat alone in the observation chamber, reviewing the footage from the last few days. Every interaction, every moment of effort, every breath Riven had taken it, all painted a picture of someone refusing to be defined by pain. She leaned back in her chair, eyes still on the screen. The will that wouldn't break wasn't something she had learned in training. It wasn't something that came from medicine. It came from something deeper, something profoundly human. And it was teaching her more than any textbook ever could. The medibay was unusually quiet. The soft hum of the monitors pulsed gently in the background, like a heartbeat heard through water. Silri sat at her usual console, her pale fingers resting lightly on the edge of the interface, but her thoughts were far from the data scrolling in front of her. Across the room, Riven stood near the observation window, gazing at the stars beyond the dome. He had been cleared for limited duty, but he still returned to the medibay every morning and evening, checking in, not just out of routine, but as if it had become something more than a place of healing. It had become part of his story, and hers too. Riven turned slightly, catching her watching him. He offered a nod, that small gesture he used instead of a smile when words felt too heavy. Silri stood and walked over to him, not to run a scan, not to adjust his readings, but simply to be beside him. They looked out together in silence for a few moments. The stars blinked like silent sentinels, keeping watch over the strange bond forming between a nurse who followed every protocol and a patient who had rewritten them. "There's something I've been wondering," Silri said at last, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. Riven glanced at her, waiting. "Why come all this way? Earth is far. Your people don't seem to be built for the kind of life this station demands. And yet, you're here." Riven didn't answer right away. He rubbed his palms together slowly, as if collecting his thoughts, and then said, "Because back home, we always think the stars mean something. That maybe if we reach far enough, we can be more than we were. I didn't come here just to train. I came to find out if we had a place out here, if we mattered beyond our own sky." Silri nodded, understanding more than she could explain. She had always believed in order, in schedules, in systems that kept everything from falling apart. But Riven had shown her something different. Not chaos, but purpose with a pulse, one that didn't always follow the charts. She remembered her early training, when she had been told that healing was about balance, chemistry, restoration. But with Riven, healing had become something alive. His recovery had defied prediction, not because the tech had changed, but because he had willed it to. That afternoon, the medibay received a transmission. A shuttle had experienced mechanical failure during an atmospheric descent training exercise. On the station's lower platform, injuries were expected. The message was brief but urgent. Silri responded immediately, gathering her med team and activating the emergency protocols. But before she could issue the dispatch, she noticed Riven was already moving. He had taken a field medpack and was slipping it over his shoulder without hesitation. "You're not cleared for active duty," she called, half instinct, half concern. Riven paused at the door. "This isn't about clearance. It's about showing up." And then he was gone, running toward the shuttle bay, with a limp barely noticeable anymore. Silvery hesitated for only a second, then followed. By the time she reached the crash site, 2 trainees had already been pulled from the wreckage, bruised and shaken, but alive. Riven was crouched beside a third, a young Zarn, with a deep gash along her thigh and what looked like a fractured wrist. He was speaking to her softly, hands steady, calming her in a way no textbook could teach. Silvery stepped in to help, and together they worked side by side, syncing without needing to speak much. She noticed how he didn't wait for permission, how he adjusted the field bandages, measured breath patterns, and reassured the frightened trainee with quiet conviction. Later, when the injured were stable and the site secure, Silvery found herself sitting beside Riven again, back in the medibay. They were both tired, but not in the same way. It was the kind of tired that came after proving something important. She looked at him and said, "You weren't supposed to be out there." He chuckled, voice low. "I've noticed the universe doesn't always care what we're supposed to be." They shared a look that said more than either could find words for. Silvery finally spoke again. "You changed the way I see humans. And you changed the way I see recovery," Riven replied. "It's not just patching wounds. It's listening to the heartbeat beneath the damage." The following day, the Medibay Council requested Silvery submit a report on Riven's progress. She sat down to write it, but found herself hesitating. She could list his vitals. She could chart his neural repair, muscle restoration, and immune adaptability. But none of that would explain why she had begun to trust him not just as a patient, but as a presence. None of it would show why the others, alien and human alike, began stopping by the Medibay even when they didn't need treatment, just to talk or train or watch the stars with Riven got in the end. She wrote something simple. At the top of her report, the pulse beyond the protocol. It was her way of saying what couldn't be graphed, that sometimes healing wasn't just about returning to normal, but about becoming something new. Riven had shown her that. Not with medicine, not with rules, but with the steady rhythm of someone who refused to stop trying. That night, as she passed the observation deck, she found him there again. This time, he didn't look up when she entered. He just said, "You ever wonder if the stars are watching us back?" Silvery smiled. "If they are, I hope they're taking notes."